A stranger's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until she signed with her hands. The silence that followed wasn't just relief. It was recognition. What the woman didn't know, the man holding that child was more powerful than any mafia boss, and the language she just spoke had been dead for 300 years. The baby scream cut through the cabin like a knife through silk. Mara Johnson pressed her earbuds deeper, but it was useless. 3 rows ahead, a man in an expensive black coat was rocking an infant who seemed determined to wake every soul on Flight 447 from Seattle to Boston. The red-eye special, the quiet flight, the one she'd specifically chosen to grade her students' essays in peace. So much for that plan. "Sir, please," a flight attendant whispered urgently. "The other passengers are complaining." "I'm trying." The man's voice was smooth, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Not anger, something else. Desperation, maybe. "He won't stop." The baby's cries intensified. Not the normal wail of a tired infant, but something raw, panicked, like the child was being torn apart from the inside. Mara pulled out her earbuds. Around her, passengers were grumbling, some calling for the flight attendant, others shooting death glares toward the man. An elderly woman, too, rose up and actually hissed, "Can't you control your own child?" The man didn't respond. He just kept rocking the baby, his movements precise but increasingly stiff. His knuckles were white where they gripped the infant's blanket. Something was wrong. Mara had worked at Oakwood School for the Deaf for 3 years as a teaching assistant. She knew the difference between a tantrum and genuine distress. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Ma'am, please remain seated," a flight attendant said as Mara stepped into the aisle. "Just 1 second." Mara moved past her, approaching the man with a screaming baby. Up close, she could see his face, sharp features, pale skin despite the summer season, dark eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days or weeks. The baby in his arms was maybe 6 months old, face red and soaked with tears. "Excuse me," Mara said softly. The man's head snapped toward her. For just a moment, his eyes flashed with something that made her breath catch. Not hostility exactly, more like a predator assessing threat. Then it was gone, replaced by exhausted courtesy. "I'm sorry," he said. "We'll be quiet soon." "That's not—" Mara hesitated. "Is your baby deaf?" The man went completely still. "What?" "The way he's crying. The overstimulation. I work with deaf children." She gestured carefully, keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "May I?" For a long moment, the man just stared at her. The baby kept screaming. Around them, the cabin had gone quiet except for the child's cries and the drone of the engines. Everyone was watching now. Finally, the man gave a single sharp nod. Mara knelt in the aisle beside his seat. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, his tiny fists clenched. She could see the rapid flutter of his heartbeat in his neck. Poor thing was terrified. Slowly, deliberately, she began to sign. Not ASL, American Sign Language, something older. Something her grandmother had taught her during long summers in San Francisco's Chinatown, claiming it was a secret language passed down through their family. A language of touch and gesture that predated words. "Safe," she signed. "You are safe. Feel the ground beneath. Feel the stillness within." The baby's cries faltered. Mara kept going, her hands moving in fluid patterns. She touched her own chest, then gestured outward, showing the expansion and contraction of breath. Ancient signs her grandmother had insisted were more than just communication. They were connection. "I hear you without sound. I see you without words. You are not alone." The baby's eyes opened. They were the most unusual color Mara had ever seen. Deep violet, almost black at the center, ringed with silver, beautiful and impossible, and fixed directly on her moving hands. Then silence, complete, absolute silence. The baby stopped crying. His tiny chest rose and fell with normal breaths, his hands unclenched, and he stared at Mara like she was the only real thing in the universe. "Holy crap," someone whispered behind her. The man holding the baby looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face had gone even paler, if that were possible, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the now quiet infant. "How did you—" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Mara smiled at the baby, who was still watching her with those strange, intent eyes. She said it was an old family tradition for calming anxious children. "Your grandmother." The man's voice was barely audible. "What was her name?" "Sarah Johnson." "Well, Johnson originally, but she went by Sarah after she moved too." "Where did her family come from originally?" The intensity in his question made Mara pull back slightly. "Texas, I think. But that was generations ago. Why does it—" "Thank you." The man cut her off, his tone suddenly formal, remote. "You've been very kind. I won't keep you from your seat." It was a dismissal, a polite one, but unmistakable. Mara stood slowly, confused. The baby made a small sound, not a cry, just a coo, and reached one tiny hand toward her. The man's arms tightened protectively. "Right," Mara said. She walked back to her seat, under the stares of 40 passengers, her mind spinning. The man's reaction had been bizarre, and those questions about her grandmother, but the baby was quiet now. That was what mattered. She buckled her seatbelt and tried to return to her essays. 3 minutes later, she gave up and stared out the window instead, watching clouds drift past in the darkness. She didn't see the man watching her in the reflection of his phone screen, his expression unreadable. She didn't see him text a single message to someone. Found one. Johnson bloodline confirmed signs. What do I do? And she definitely didn't see the 2 passengers in row 12 exchange a glance and pull out their phones, typing identical messages to a different contact entirely. Target confirmed. Royal Air traveling. Intercept upon landing. The plane hummed through the night sky. The baby, finally at peace, slept with one small fist pressed against his father's chest, and Mara Johnson tried very hard to ignore the feeling that her entire life had just tilted sideways into something she couldn't possibly understand. Not yet. David couldn't breathe. Not that he needed to. Breathing was more habit than necessity for someone like him. But the shock had locked his chest anyway. The woman had used the royal caretaker language, the actual language, not an approximation, not a coincidence of similar gestures. She'd signed the threefold calming, a sequence so specific, so ancient, that only 5 people in recorded history had ever mastered it, and they were all dead. He'd watched them die himself 347 years ago, when the Hunter clans had burned the caretaker's hall to the ground. The screams still haunted him sometimes in the rare moments when he let himself remember. The caretakers had been human, yes, but they'd been his people, protectors of vampire children, guardians of the most vulnerable members of his kind. The slaughter had been complete, thorough, not a single survivor, or so he'd thought. David looked down at Michael, who slept peacefully for the first time in 3 days. His son's tiny face was relaxed, the constant tension finally released from his small body. Since the boy's mother had died in childbirth 2 months ago, taking with her the only other vampire who could naturally soothe him, Michael had been inconsolable. Deaf vampire infants were rare, perhaps 1 in every 1,000 births. They experienced the world differently, more intensely. Every vibration, every shift in air pressure, every pulse of living hearts around them became overwhelming without proper guidance. Without a caretaker who knew the old ways, David had been traveling to Boston to meet with a council of elders, hoping they might know of some ancient text, some forgotten solution. Instead, this human woman named Mara Johnson, had appeared out of nowhere and solved a problem he'd thought unsolvable. Johnson. He knew that name. It was in the records in the bloodline archives kept in the Obsidian Citadel. The Johnson family had served the Eastern vampire courts for generations before the massacre. One daughter had been traveling abroad when the attack happened, had survived, had disappeared into human society. This woman was her descendant, had to be, which meant the knowledge hadn't died after all. It had simply hidden, passed down through whispers and grandmother's stories. Waiting. But waiting for what? David shifted in his seat, careful not to wake Michael. For now Mara Johnson was bent over a stack of papers, red pen moving across them in quick, efficient strokes. She looked so ordinary. Jeans, a faded State University sweatshirt, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Mid-20s maybe. Definitely not someone who looked like she carried the genetic memory of vampire caretaker techniques. She glanced up suddenly as if sensing his attention. Their eyes met for a brief second before she looked away, a small frown creasing her forehead. She had no idea what she'd done, no concept of the magnitude. That was dangerous for her and for Michael. David pulled out his phone, keeping the screen tilted away from prying eyes. The message he'd sent earlier had 3 responses now. Mark, Johnson line went extinct. Sarah, if true, bring her in immediately. Council must verify. Robert, don't trust it. Could be a trap. Hunters have been probing our defenses for months. Robert's paranoia was warranted, but wrong. David had seen the genuine confusion on Mara's face when Michael responded to her signs. She hadn't known what would happen, hadn't expected it. Real hunters would have known, would have been prepared. Still, he composed a careful response. We'll observe, making contact after landing. Keep this contained. He hit send and immediately deleted the entire conversation thread, old habits from centuries of hiding in plain sight. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around them, passengers began stirring, stretching, making the small movements of people on a long flight. David stayed perfectly still, his enhanced hearing picking up conversations throughout the cabin. Row 8. Never seen anything like it. 1 second screaming, the next. Row 12. Definitely the air mark. Right eye, silver ring. David's attention sharpened on row 12. 2 men, mid-40s, both wearing dark jackets despite the warm cabin temperature. He'd clocked them during boarding. Something off about their heartbeats, too controlled, too steady. He dismissed it as nervous flyers. Now, one of them was talking about an air mark. Very few humans knew about air marks, the royal birthmark that appeared in a ring around a vampire air's pupil, visible only under certain light conditions. Hunters knew. David adjusted his position slightly, angling himself so he could watch them in the reflection of the darkened window. The one on the aisle had his phone out, showing something to his companion. The screen was angled away, but David caught a glimpse of text. Confirmed royal bloodline. Child is vulnerable. His blood went cold. Metaphorically speaking, they'd been made. Somehow, despite his precautions, despite traveling under a false identity and suppressing his aura, these hunters had identified them, which meant landing in Boston just became exponentially more complicated. Michael stirred against his chest, making a small sound. David immediately placed one hand against his son's back, feeling the rapid flutter of the infant's heartbeat. Still asleep but restless. They had maybe another hour before the child would wake and need attention again. Another hour before he'd start crying and draw even more attention. David looked at Mara Johnson again. She was the solution to multiple problems. But approaching her meant revealing himself, at least partially, meant trusting a stranger with secrets that could destroy them both. But keeping his distance meant Michael would suffer. Meant those hunters in row 12 would have an easier time tracking a screaming infant through a crowded airport. It wasn't really a choice at all. David pulled out his phone again and typed a new message, not to his vampire contacts, but to a local number, a safe house in Cambridge, one he maintained under another identity. Prepare guest accommodations. 2 humans, 1 infant. High security. Tonight, the die was cast. Now he just had to figure out how to convince Mara Johnson to trust him enough to follow a stranger into the night while staying ahead of hunters who'd already marked them for death. Mara gathered her papers, shoving them into her messenger bag with less care than usual. She was exhausted. The adrenaline from the baby incident had worn off, leaving her jittery and unfocused. All she wanted was to catch a ride home, collapse into bed, and forget this weird night had ever happened. She stood when the seatbelt sign dinged off, reaching for her carry-on in the overhead compartment. "Excuse me, Miss Johnson." She turned. The man with the baby stood in the aisle, the infant tucked securely against his shoulder. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, at least 6 feet 2 inches, with a presence that made the narrow cabin feel even smaller. The baby was awake now, those strange violet eyes watching her with unsettling focus. "Yes, I wanted to properly thank you." His voice was different now, formal, almost old-fashioned in its precision. What you did was extraordinary. I'm David. David Anderson. He extended his free hand. Mara shook it briefly, trying not to notice how cold his skin felt. Just the airplane AC, probably. It's fine, really. I'm glad I could help. She smiled at the baby. He's beautiful. What's his name? Michael. David's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He's been difficult since his mother passed. Nothing seemed to comfort him until... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Until you. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mara said quietly. The line of passengers behind them was growing restless, people shuffling and sighing. Listen, I should probably... Would you have dinner with us tomorrow evening? The question came out rushed, almost desperate. Then David seemed to catch himself, his composure sliding back into place. To thank you properly, I'm staying in Cambridge temporarily. There's an excellent restaurant near Harvard Square, my treat, of course. Mara hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was weird. You didn't have dinner with random men you met on airplanes, no matter how cute their babies were or how politely they asked. But something about the way Michael was looking at her, those impossible eyes so intent and trusting, made her pause. I don't know, she said finally. I'm pretty busy with work. Please, David's voice dropped lower. Michael needs... That is, I would be grateful for any advice you might have about his condition. You clearly have experience that I lack. The baby chose that moment to reach out one tiny hand toward Mara, not crying, just seeking. Damn it. Okay, she heard herself say, tomorrow, but somewhere public and I'm driving myself. Relief flashed across David's face. Of course. I'll text you the details. Your number? They exchanged phones, entering contact information while the passenger behind them made an exaggerated throat-clearing sound. Mara grabbed her bag and squeezed past them, joining the slow shuffle toward the exit. She didn't look back, but if she had, she might have seen David's expression shift from relief to alertness as he glanced toward row 12, where two men were standing with unusual patience, making no move to retrieve their luggage. The terminal was chaos. Friday night arrivals, families reuniting, business travelers speed-walking toward ground transportation. Mara wove through the crowd heading for the rideshare pickup area. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Harvest Moon Restaurant, 7 p.m. Thank you again. She was about to reply when someone bumped into her from behind, hard. Sorry, a male voice said. But when Mara turned, the man was already walking away. Tall, dark jacket, moving with purpose toward the baggage claim. Something cold slithered down her spine. That hadn't felt accidental. She clutched her bag tighter and kept walking faster now. The exit was just ahead, automatic doors leading to the cool night air and the relative safety of... Excuse me, miss. Another man, this one directly in her path, also wearing a dark jacket, 40s, bland features, the kind of face you'd forget immediately except his eyes. They were too focused, too calculating. Yes? Mara said, trying to step around him. He moved to block her. You were sitting in row 7, correct? On flight 447. Every hair on the back of her neck stood up. Why are you asking? Simple question. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Did you notice anything unusual about the passenger in row 4? The man with the infant? I don't know what you're talking about. Mara's heart was hammering now. Excuse me. She pushed past him, walking fast toward the doors. Behind her, she heard him say something into a phone. She spooked, moving to exit B. Oh, God. Mara broke into a jog, dodging travelers and luggage carts. The exit was 20 feet away. 15. 10. A hand caught her elbow. Mara Johnson. David's voice. Quiet and urgent. He'd appeared out of nowhere, Michael still secured against his chest in some kind of wrap carrier. Don't react. Don't look behind us. Those men are following you. I know, she hissed. What the hell is going on? Not here. His grip tightened fractionally. I have a car in the garage, level 3. We need to move now. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't even know. They think you're connected to me, to Michael. David's voice was absolutely level, but his eyes were intense. Which means they'll hurt you to get to us. I can protect you, but only if you trust me for the next 5 minutes. After that, you can call the police, run away, whatever you want. But right now we move together." Mara's mind raced. The man who'd questioned her was pushing through the crowd now, his companion emerging from another direction, flanking positions. She looked at David, at the baby in his arms, watching her with those trusting, impossible eyes. 5 minutes, she said. 5 minutes, he agreed. They ran. The apartment was nothing like Mara expected. She'd imagined something temporary, a cramped Airbnb with IKEA furniture and generic art on the walls. Instead, David's rental was a spacious loft in Cambridge with exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of elegant minimalism that screamed money, old money. "You can put your bag anywhere," David said, locking the door behind them. 3 locks, Mara noticed, heavy-duty ones. "Would you like water?" "Yeah, answers." Mara stayed near the door, arms crossed. "I want answers. Who were those men? Why were they following us? And don't tell me you don't know, because you clearly do." David set Michael down in an expensive-looking playpen near the windows. The baby immediately reached for a soft toy, content for the moment. Then David turned to face her, and something in his posture changed, became more formal, almost regal. "You're right," he said quietly. "I do know, but before I explain, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. Insane, even." Mara's stomach dropped. "Are we running from some kind of mob?" "Nothing so mundane." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Please sit." Against her better judgment, Mara perched on the edge of an armchair. David remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back like some kind of military officer. "Those men at the airport are hunters," he began. "Members of an organization that has existed for over 1,000 years. Their sole purpose is to track and eliminate what they consider threats to humanity." "Threats?" Mara repeated slowly. "You mean like terrorists?" "I mean like vampires." The word hung in the air between them. Mara waited for the punchline. The just kidding. The indication that this was some elaborate joke. It never came. "You're insane," she said finally. "Am I?" David moved with impossible speed, one moment across the room, the next standing directly in front of her. Mara's breath caught. She hadn't even seen him move. "Your grandmother taught you the threefold calming, a technique that shouldn't exist anymore, that only vampire caretakers knew. How do you explain that family tradition?" "Cultural heritage. I don't know." Mara stood up, backing away. "That doesn't mean vampires are real. It means my grandmother knew some old signing techniques." "Watch." David held up one hand. Then, deliberately, he pressed a letter opener against his palm and drew it across the skin. Blood welled up, dark and red. Mara gasped, but before she could speak, the wound began to close. In seconds, the skin knitted itself back together until no trace of the cut remained. "Parlor trick," Mara whispered, but her voice shook. "Magicians do that all the time." "Your heart rate just spiked to 140 beats per minute. David tilted his head slightly. "You're breathing in short, shallow gasps. Fight or flight response. Your body knows the truth, even if your mind resists it." He was right. Mara could feel her pulse hammering, her hands trembling. This wasn't possible. Couldn't be possible. But she'd also seen him move faster than physics should allow, seen his wound heal in seconds. And those men at the airport, the way they'd moved, the focused intensity, they'd been hunting something. Someone. "Michael," she said suddenly. "He's half vampire. His mother was human." David's expression softened when he looked at his son. "He has all the vulnerabilities of a vampire infant, the sensory overload, the need for careful guidance, but none of the typical soothing responses work. He's deaf in a way that makes the vampire world even more overwhelming." Mara sank back into the chair, her mind spinning. "The signs I used. My grandmother said they were for calming, anxious children." "They were vampire children, specifically." David moved to the playpen, running a gentle hand over Michael's dark hair. 3 centuries ago, there were human families who served as caretakers for our kind. They were honored, protected, considered part of vampire society. Your ancestor, Johnson, was one of them." "Was," Mara echoed, The hunters found the caretaker's hall in 1677. They burned it to the ground. His voice went flat. Everyone inside died. I thought the knowledge died with them. But Johnson was traveling that night, visiting family in Texas. She survived, and apparently she passed down what she knew. Mara's throat was tight. My grandmother never said anything about vampires. She just taught me the signs, said they were important, that I should remember them. She was protecting you. If the hunters knew any caretaker bloodline still existed. David turned back to her. What happened at the airport proves they're watching. They saw you calm Michael, saw him respond to you in a way he shouldn't respond to ordinary humans. So they think I'm what? A threat, a connection, a way to get to us. He paused. I am sorry, Mara. I didn't mean to endanger you. But now that you're involved, I can't simply walk away. Those hunters won't stop. They'll research you, follow you, wait for another opportunity to do what? To use you as leverage or eliminate you as a potential ally to my kind. His voice was gentle but firm. Either way, you're safer here tonight. Tomorrow in daylight, we can figure out next steps. I can arrange protection, relocation if necessary. I have a job, a life. Mara's voice rose. I can't just disappear because you think some vampire hunters are after me. Michael made a distressed sound. Both adults immediately looked at him. The baby's face was scrunching up, the precursor to tears. Without thinking, Mara moved to the playpen. Her hands began signing automatically. The calming sequence, the signs for safety and comfort. Michael's eyes fixed on her movements, and the distress faded. David watched silently. He needs you, he said finally. Not because I'm forcing this, but because you're the only person since his mother who can reach him. I won't compel you to stay, but I'm asking, please, just for tonight, let me explain everything. Answer your questions. Then, if you want to leave, I'll arrange the best protection I can and let you go. Mara looked at the baby who was watching her with absolute trust. Just tonight, she heard herself say. David nodded. Just tonight. But they both knew it was already more than that. Mara sat on the couch with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, watching David move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. He changed out of his travel clothes into dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, looking less like a desperate father and more like someone from a cologne advertisement. A vampire from a cologne advertisement. God. Her life had gotten weird. You can ask, David said without turning around. Whatever questions you have, I'll answer truthfully. How old are you? 473. He said it the way someone else might say, 35. I was born in 1552 in what's now Pennsylvania, turned in 1570. Mara's brain stuttered over the math. You're older than America by quite a bit. Yes. He brought over a bottle of water for himself and sat in the chair across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. Though I've lived in the States since 1823, Boston primarily, with time in New York and San Francisco. San Francisco. Mara's breath caught. My grandmother lived in San Francisco. I know. The Johnson family settled there in 1889. I kept distant watch, making sure the bloodline was safe, unharmed by hunters. But I never made contact. It seemed cruel to burden them with a history they'd escaped. But you knew all this time. You knew my family was what, special carriers of sacred knowledge? David's expression grew distant. The caretakers weren't servants, Mara. They were essential. Vampire infants are born with heightened senses, no emotional regulation, and instincts they can't control. Without proper guidance, they can die, or worse, become feral. Feral, Mara repeated weakly. Lost to bloodlust, unable to think, to reason, just predators. He glanced at Michael, who was drowsing in the playpen. The caretakers knew how to ground them. The signs you used, they're not just calming techniques. They're a language that speaks directly to a vampire child's nervous system. Touch, rhythm, intentional movement. It bypasses conscious thought. Mara finally took a sip of tea. It had gone lukewarm. My grandmother used to say the signs were about showing children they're not alone in the silence. I thought she meant deaf kids in general. She did, but she also meant vampire children specifically. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Johnson saw no difference. Deaf, vampire, human. They were all children who needed understanding. That philosophy made the caretakers invaluable. You talk about them like you knew them. I did. His voice went quiet. My younger sister had a caretaker named Emily. Human woman, maybe 25 years old, with red hair and a laugh like bells. She took care of my sister for 3 years until... He stopped, jaw tightening. The fire, Mara finished softly. The hunters chose a night when most of the vampire court was away on diplomatic business. They locked the doors from outside and set the building ablaze. The caretakers were trapped. We found their bodies in the morning, clustered around the children they tried to protect. Mara's chest ached. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, but his eyes said otherwise. I've spent 3 centuries making sure it never happens again, building alliances, monitoring hunter organizations, keeping my people safe. And then Michael was born and I realized... He looked at his son. I realized I had no idea how to care for him properly. His mother tried, but she was human, and she died before she could learn enough. I was failing him. You're not failing him, Mara said automatically. You got on a plane and traveled across the country looking for help. That's not failing. I was going to Boston to beg ancient vampires for scraps of lost knowledge. A bitter smile. And instead the knowledge found me. Found him. Do you understand how impossible that is? The probability of you being on that specific flight in that specific seat. Coincidence. I stopped believing in coincidence around 1650. David stood, moving to the window. Your grandmother knew you'd need those signs someday. She must have. Why else insist you learn them? Practice them until they were instinctive. Mara thought about those long summer afternoons, her grandmother's patient hands guiding hers through the sequences. Again, Mara, until your hands remember without thinking, these signs are our family's gift. She never told me about vampires, Mara said, never even hinted. Would you have believed her? Fair point. What happens now? Mara asked. You said the hunters saw me with Michael. What does that mean for me? David was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. If they identify you as Johnson bloodline, they'll watch you, follow you. They may try to use you as bait to draw me out. Or they may decide you're too dangerous to live, a potential caretaker who could strengthen vampire society. That's insane. I'm a teaching assistant. I grade papers and help kids learn to read. I'm not some vampire secret weapon. You calmed a royal heir with 3 gestures. David turned to face her. Do you know what that means politically? The vampire world has spent 3 centuries without caretakers. Heirs are raised poorly, their education fragmented. Many grow up unstable, violent. The noble houses fight constantly because no one remembers how to properly guide the next generation. And you think I can change that? I think you already have. By helping Michael, you've proven the old ways survived. That knowledge can be relearned. His eyes were intense. The council will want to meet you. Other vampire families will seek you out, and the hunters will do everything in their power to prevent that. Mara's head was spinning. This is too much. This morning I was worried about lesson plans and student evaluations. Now you're telling me I'm some kind of living historical artifact. You're not an artifact. You're a person with an extraordinary gift. David's voice softened. And I'm not asking you to become something you're not, but I am asking you to stay safe, at least until we know what the hunters plan to do. How long? A few days, maybe a week. I have work on Monday. I can't just... Michael whimpered. Both adults immediately froze. The baby was stirring, his face scrunching with discomfort. Mara watched as David moved to the playpen with supernatural speed, scooping up his son with practiced care. But Michael kept fussing, small cries building. Without thinking, Mara crossed the room. She held out her hands, and David, after a brief hesitation, passed the baby to her. Immediately she began signing. Safe, warm, protected. Your father is here. I am here. You are loved. Michael's cries faded. His tiny hand reached up, brushing against her fingers as they moved. And then he smiled, a real, genuine smile, that made Mara's heart crack open. "Oh," she whispered. David was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. He's never smiled like that before. Mara looked down at the baby in her arms, at his impossible violet eyes, and the complete trust written there. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I'll stay for now, until we figure this out." She met David's gaze. "But I'm not doing this just because of vampire politics or hunter threats. I'm doing it for him because he needs help and apparently I can give it." Something in David's expression shifted. Relief maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. Michael yawned, snuggling against Mara's chest, and somewhere across the city, in a nondescript office building, 2 hunters marked a file with a single word: confirmed. Mara jerked awake on the couch where she'd fallen asleep, her heart hammering. For a disoriented second, she thought she'd dreamed it. Then she heard David's voice, sharp and commanding from the bedroom. "Stay with Michael, don't come out." She was on her feet before she'd fully processed the words, stumbling toward the nursery alcove where Michael slept in a converted closet. The baby was awake, eyes wide, but not crying yet. Mara scooped him up just as another crash echoed through the apartment. "David!" she called, keeping her voice low. Mara's hands moved automatically, signing the calming sequence while her mind raced. The bedroom door was closed. She could hear sounds behind it, thuds, grunts, the scrape of furniture being moved, fighting. She needed to get out, but the apartment's front door was past the bedroom, past whatever was happening in there. The window. Could she? The bedroom door exploded outward. A man stumbled through, not David. Tall, muscular, wearing tactical gear and holding something that looked like a silver blade. His eyes locked onto Mara with predatory focus. "There," he said into a radio, "I have the caretaker and the heir." Mara backed toward the window, clutching Michael. "Stay away from us. Hand over the child. You don't have to die tonight, Miss Johnson." "Not happening." The hunter took a step forward, then stopped, his expression shifting to confusion. He looked down at his chest where a hand had emerged impossibly from behind, fingers curved like claws. "Wrong answer," David said coldly. He moved so fast Mara's eyes couldn't track it. One moment the hunter was standing, the next he was on the ground, unconscious or worse. David straightened and Mara saw blood on his shirt, his own, from a wound in his side that was already healing. "There are more," he said tersely. "At least 3 outside. They must have been watching, waiting until they thought I was vulnerable." "Are you?" "I'll heal, but I can't fight them all and protect you both." His eyes met hers. "We need to leave now. There's a fire escape outside the far window." Another crash, this time from the front door, heavy boots on hardwood. "Anderson," a voice called. "We have the building surrounded. Send out the woman and child." David moved to Mara's side, his voice dropping to a whisper. "When I say run, you take Michael and go down the fire escape. Turn left at the alley, then right on Mass Avenue. There's a 24-hour diner called the Blue Star. Go inside and wait. What about you? I'll hold them off and catch up." He was already moving toward the bedroom, grabbing a leather jacket. "They can hurt me, but they can't kill me easily. You and Michael are fragile. You're the priority." "David!" 2 hunters emerged from a hallway, both armed with those silver blades. David's entire demeanor changed, became something ancient and terrifying. His eyes darkened to pure black, and when he smiled, Mara saw fangs. "Run," he said. She sprinted to the window, threw it open with one hand while holding Michael with the other. The fire escape was old metal, rusted and rickety. She didn't care. Behind her she heard fighting, the crash of bodies, breaking furniture, a scream cut short. "Don't look back." She clambered onto the fire escape. Michael clutched against her chest. The baby was making distressed sounds, picking up on her fear. Mara forced herself to breathe slowly, her hands signing against his back, even as she climbed down. Safe. Moving, but safe. "Trust me. I have you." 2 flights down. 3. The alley was dark, smelling of garbage and old rain. Mara hit the ground and ran left. Just as David had said, behind her, something heavy crashed out of a different window. She glanced back, a hunter taking a shortcut. He hit the ground in a crouch, completely unharmed by the 3-story fall. Oh God. Mara pushed herself faster, her lungs burning. Michael was surprisingly heavy for an infant. Her arms ached. The alleys seemed to stretch forever. Right on Mass Avenue, the diner should be there. Blue neon sign, half the letters burned out. The Blue Star. She burst through the door, startling the elderly waitress behind the counter. "Please," Mara gasped. "Someone's following me. I need—" The waitress's expression shifted immediately. She came around the counter, ushering Mara toward the back. "Booth in the corner. Sit with your back to the wall." Mara obeyed, sliding into the worn vinyl seat. Through the window, she could see the hunter from the alley, standing at the entrance to the alley, scanning the street. He was talking into his radio. "You know David," Mara whispered. "Everyone in the community knows the Anderson name." The waitress, her name tag said Dolores, poured coffee into a mug. "Drink. You look like hell. The baby okay?" Mara looked down. Michael was staring at her with those intense eyes. But he wasn't crying. Her hands were still moving through the signs, muscle memory taking over. "He's okay," she said shakily. "David said he'd catch up." "He will. Man's 4 centuries old." Before Mara could process the fact that apparently random diner waitresses knew about vampires, the door chimed. David walked in. He looked like he'd been through a war. His shirt was torn and blood-stained. His face had a cut that was still healing, and he was limping slightly, but he was alive, moving. And when he saw them in the booth, relief flooded his features. "You made it," he said, sliding in across from them. "Any trouble?" Dolores asked, pouring him coffee he wouldn't drink. One was waiting in the stairwell. David's eyes never left Mara and Michael. "They're dealt with, but more will come. They know where I'm staying now." "So, what do we do?" Mara asked. David was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the table. Without thinking, Mara reached out and placed her free hand over his. He looked startled, then grateful. "We disappear," he said finally. "I have resources, safe houses they don't know about. We leave Boston tonight. Drive south, maybe. Change our identities. Lay low until—" "No," Mara interrupted. Both David and Dolores looked at her in surprise. "No running," Mara said firmly. "You said there's a vampire council. People who would want to know about me, about what I can do. So we go to them, we go to your people, and we make this official. We stop hiding, and we stand in the open, where the hunters can't just pick us off in the dark." "The council is in the Obsidian Citadel," David said slowly. "That's not exactly a safe place for a human." Mara looked at Michael, who was finally drowsing against her shoulder. "He deserves better than running, and if what you said is true, if I really am the last of the caretaker bloodline, then maybe it's time your people knew I exist." David studied her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. "You sound like Johnson. She never backed down from a fight either." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He stood, wincing slightly. "But we leave now, before they regroup." Dolores slid a set of keys across the table. "Black sedan, back parking lot. Tank's full. Don't bring it back, shot full of holes." "Thank you, Dee." "Thank the girl. She's got spine." Dolores winked at Mara. "Good luck, honey. You're going to need it." 10 minutes later, they were on I-95 heading south, the city lights fading behind them. Michael slept peacefully in his car seat, and Mara wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. The old cathedral looked abandoned. Mara stood in the pre-dawn darkness, staring up at the crumbling stone facade somewhere in rural Connecticut. David had driven for 3 hours in silence, finally pulling off the highway onto increasingly smaller roads until they'd reached this forgotten place. "This is where your council meets?" she asked skeptically. David pulled Michael from the car seat, the baby still drowsy and content. "The fortress is in California. But before we go there, before I introduce you to politics and power plays, I want you to see something, to understand what you're walking into." He led them around the side of the building to a door so weathered it seemed part of the stone itself. David pressed his palm against it, and Mary heard mechanisms clicking, electronic locks, disguised as ancient wood. The door swung open. Inside, stone steps spiraled downward into darkness. David produced a flashlight from somewhere, illuminating the descent. The air smelled of age and secrets. "Stay close," he said quietly. They went down and down. The stairs seemed endless, cutting deep into the earth until Mary's legs burned and her ears popped from the pressure change. Finally, they reached the bottom. David touched something on the wall and lights flickered on. Not electric, but some kind of phosphorescent crystal embedded in the stone. The glow revealed a massive underground chamber. Mary's breath caught. The walls were covered in murals, hundreds of them stretching up toward a vaulted ceiling, painted in colors that still looked fresh despite obvious age. They depicted scenes of humans and vampires together, not in violence, but in partnership. Humans cradling vampire infants, their hands forming familiar signs. Vampires and humans sharing meals, walking gardens, teaching children together. "The Archive of the Covenant," David said softly, "built in 1203 by the first vampire-human alliance. This is what we were, Mary, before the fear, before the hunts." Mary walked forward slowly, Michael stirring in her arms. The detail in the murals was extraordinary. She could see the expressions on painted faces, the tenderness, the trust. In one scene, a human woman held a vampire child who was clearly distressed, her hands positioned in the threefold calming. "My grandmother's signs," Mary whispered. "Your ancestors' signs," David corrected. He'd stopped before a particular mural, larger than the others. It showed a ceremony of some kind. Vampires in formal robes standing in a circle around a human woman who held an infant. The woman wore a pendant, clearly visible even in the ancient painting. A circular design with intricate knotwork. Mary's hand went to her throat. She had worn that pendant this morning, had worn it every day since her grandmother died. A simple inheritance she'd thought was just a family heirloom. She'd left it at her apartment when they fled, but she knew every curve and line of it. "That's impossible," she said. David moved closer to the mural, his finger tracing the air near the painted woman's face. "This was painted just months before the massacre. She's holding the heir to the Eastern courts, a girl named Elizabeth, who would have been queen if she'd survived." Mary felt dizzy. The woman in the painting had her grandmother's eyes. Or maybe Mary had the painted woman's eyes. It was impossible to tell where the past ended and the present began. "Huh?" Mary asked. Each caretaker family had a unique design passed down through generations. The Miller pendant was always knotwork and crescent moons. He glanced at her. "You said you inherited one from your grandmother." "Yes, but—" Mary's mind was reeling. This could be coincidence. Similar designs. "Look at the inscription." Mary moved closer. At the bottom of the mural, elegant script were words in multiple languages. English, Latin, Chinese characters. She focused on the Chinese, her grandmother's first language. "Miller, guardian of the silent ones, her bloodline will endure even in darkness." "Even in darkness," Mary repeated. Her voice cracked. She knew. When she ran, when she hid in human society, she knew someday we'd be needed again. She preserved the knowledge in the only way she could. Hidden in plain sight, disguised as family tradition. David's expression was solemn. The hunters thought they'd eliminated the caretakers, but they only scattered them. Michael made a small sound. Mary looked down to find him awake, his violet eyes fixed on the murals. His tiny hand reached out, fingers splaying toward the painted figures. "He can see them," David said, wonder in his voice. "He understands somehow." Mary walked slowly through the chamber, taking in more murals. Some showed caretakers teaching vampire children to read. Others depicted medical care, play, celebration. In every image, the bond between human and vampire was clear. Not servitude, but mutual respect. "Why did it end?" she asked. "Fear, misunderstanding. A vampire noble murdered a human lord's daughter in 1645, and it sparked a war. The humans couldn't fight vampires directly, so they targeted what we valued most." David's jaw tightened. "Our children, our caretakers, the hunters burned the halls, killed anyone connected to vampire society. We retaliated. For 50 years it was bloodshed and horror, and the caretakers were caught in the middle. They tried to broker peace, failed. He touched the wall gently. This archive was sealed to protect it. Only a few vampires in each generation know it exists. The Council believes the caretaker knowledge is lost forever. But you're taking me to them anyway because you're proof it's not lost. Proof we can reclaim what we were. David turned to face her fully. Mary, I need you to understand what you're walking into. The Council is divided. Some will see you as hope. Others will see you as a threat. A human with influence over vampire heirs, including the future king. There will be those who want to use you, some who want to control you, and a few who will want you dead. Comforting, Mary said dryly. I won't let anything happen to you. Or to Michael. His voice was firm. But I need you to know the risks. Once we go to the fortress, once they know you exist, there's no going back to your normal life. Mary looked at the baby in her arms, then back at the murals, at the painted woman who wore her face, who'd fled into darkness, carrying knowledge she believed was worth preserving. My grandmother used to tell me a story, Mary said quietly, about a woman who carried a light through a long tunnel. She didn't know where the tunnel led, didn't know if anyone would see her light, but she carried it anyway because someone had to remember the sun. She met David's eyes. I think I understand now what she meant. This knowledge, these signs, they're the light, and maybe it's my turn to carry them. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he bowed, a formal gesture that seemed to come from centuries of practice. Guardian of the silent air, he said softly. Above them, the painted faces seemed to watch with approval, and Michael, cradled against Mary's heart, reached out one small hand and touched her cheek, a gesture that needed no translation. Trust, connection, family. The drive to California would take another 6 hours. But for the first time since that airplane cry shattered her normal life, Mary felt like she was moving towards something instead of running away. The safe house was a converted farmhouse in rural California, still 2 hours from the obsidian fortress. We'll rest here for a day, David had said when they arrived at sunset. Let you adjust before the council meeting. Now 3 days later, Mary understood he'd been giving her time for something else entirely. She woke on the third morning, with tears on her face and a lullaby on her lips, words in a language she didn't speak, had never learned. The melody was ancient, haunting, and she knew instinctively it was meant for vampire children, knew the exact rhythm to rock while singing, the hand movements to accompany each verse. She sat up in bed, her heart racing. Not again, she whispered. It had started the second night. Small things at first, the knowledge of how to prepare a specific herbal tea that would help Michael sleep more deeply, the instinct to touch his forehead in a particular pattern that regulated his overwhelmed senses. Mary had dismissed it as stress, or maybe osmosis, from watching David care for his son. But this morning, she'd woken with complete detailed memories of feeding rituals for vampire infants, how to warm blood to the precise temperature, which herbs to add for nutrition, the prayers, actual prayers, to speak while preparing each meal, memories that weren't hers. Mary found David in the kitchen, already awake despite the early hour. Michael was in a bassinet nearby, watching dust motes dance in the morning light. I need to ask you something, Mary said without preamble. Is it possible for memories to be inherited, passed down genetically? David looked up from his coffee, his expression carefully neutral. Why do you ask? Because I keep knowing things I shouldn't know. Last night I prepared Michael's bottle exactly right, the temperature, the mixture, without anyone teaching me. And this morning I woke up singing a lullaby in what I think is medieval Romanian. Ah, David set down his cup. I wondered when this would begin. When what would begin? Memory echoes, not reincarnation, he added quickly, seeing her alarm. You're not becoming someone else, but the caretaker bond is more than learned knowledge. It's encoded epigenetic inheritance, combined with something we don't fully understand. When a caretaker bloodline awakens, the ancestral knowledge surfaces. Mary sank into a chair. So, I'm remembering things my ancestors did, experiencing echoes of their skills. Yes, it's strongest with physical tasks, muscle memory, instinctive responses. You won't suddenly remember conversations or personal details, but the craft of caretaking, that comes back. He studied her carefully. Is it frightening? I don't know. Yes, maybe. Mary rubbed her face. I keep having moments where my hands move on their own, where I just know what to do for Michael without thinking. It feels like I'm sharing my body with someone else. You're sharing knowledge, not consciousness. Your grandmother carried these same echoes. She likely experienced them when you were born, watching her daughter raise you. The bloodline remembers. Michael made a sound. Without thinking, Mary went to him, her hands already forming soothing patterns in the air. The baby's eyes tracked her movements, his small face relaxing. See, David said softly. That's not someone else moving your hands. That's you accessing inherited skill, like musical talent or athletic ability, but more specific. This is so weird. Welcome to Vampire Society. Weird is our baseline. Despite everything, Mary smiled. Over the past 3 days, she'd seen different sides of David. Not just the desperate father or the ancient king, but someone who made dry jokes and knew how to cook breakfast and read bedtime stories to his son in 4 different languages. She lifted Michael from the bassinet, and the baby immediately snuggled against her shoulder. The gesture felt right in a way that transcended normal bonding. There's something else, Mary said. When I hold him, I can almost feel what he's feeling. Not thoughts exactly, but emotions, when he's uncomfortable or content or scared. The empathic bond. All caretakers developed it. David moved closer, watching them. It's how they knew what the children needed before the children could communicate it. With deaf vampire infants especially, that bond was essential. Will it get stronger? Probably. The more time you spend with him, the deeper the connection becomes, he paused. Does it bother you? Mary considered. The logical part of her brain said yes. This should be terrifying. Genetic memories, empathic bonds, ancient knowledge surfacing unbidden. But holding Michael, feeling his contentment, the fear seemed distant. No, she said honestly. Something shifted in David's expression. Your grandmother would be proud. I wish she'd told me, prepared me walking gardens with David while discussing vampire history and human teaching methods, finding unexpected friendship with Jennifer and even stern Elizabeth. I'm not unhappy, she said finally. I miss my old life sometimes, my students, my routine, but I don't regret being here. That's not the same as being happy. No, she agreed, but happiness isn't instant. It's built day by day, choice by choice. She looked at Michael, who was babbling softly to himself while playing. I think I could be happy here. I think I'm already starting to be. Relief washed over David's face. Good, because we have a ceremony to prepare for. Ceremony. Your formal installation as guardian of the silent heir. 3 days from now, in front of the full court, he pulled a small box from his pocket, which means you'll need this. He opened the box to reveal a pendant, her grandmother's pendant, the one she'd left behind in Chicago. The circular design with intricate knotwork that matched the mural in the hidden archive. How did you? I had someone retrieve it from your apartment, along with some of your other belongings, books, photos, clothes. They're being delivered later today. His expression softened. I can't give you back your old life, Mary, but I can make sure pieces of it come with you into this new one. Mary's throat tightened. She took the pendant, feeling the familiar weight of it, the worn silver warm in her hand. Thank you. Will you let me? David gestured to the clasp. She nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin, careful not to catch her hair. When she turned back, he was watching her with an expression. She couldn't quite read. You look like her, he said softly. She in the paintings, same determination, same strength. I'm terrified most of the time. So was she. But she carried the knowledge anyway, saved it, passed it down through generations until it found its way back to where it was needed. He smiled. That's not weakness. That's courage. Michael made a demanding sound, his hands moving through signs. Up. Want up? Mary laughed, going to him immediately. Someone's getting bossy with his vocabulary. She lifted him and Michael immediately began signing more. Happy home. Yes. Mary signed back, feeling truth in the gestures. Home. She looked around the restored nursery, at the murals depicting caretakers and children, at the windows letting in afternoon light, at David watching them both with unguarded affection. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she boarded that red-eye flight from Los Angeles, but it was hers now, built from impossible coincidence and ancient bloodlines, from a baby's cry and a stranger's desperate need, built from choices made in fear and trust given despite danger. Thank you, she said to David, for not giving up on finding a caretaker for him, for not giving up on me when I was difficult. You weren't difficult, you were right. He moved closer, his hand resting gently on Michael's dark hair about everything. I needed a partner, not a servant. Michael needed a guardian, not a prisoner, forced to care for him. And what do you need? The question slipped out before Mary could stop it. David was quiet for a long moment, his eyes meeting hers over Michael's head. I need to know my son is loved, protected, that he'll grow up with someone who sees him as a child first and an heir second. And I think I need someone I can trust completely in a world full of politics and lies. That's a lot of responsibility. It is. But you're already carrying it. His smile was gentle. You have been since the moment you stood up on that airplane and decided a stranger's baby deserved help. Michael yawned, snuggling against Mary's shoulder. His small hand found the pendant at her throat, fingers tracing the familiar knotwork pattern. And Mary realized her grandmother had been right all along. The signs were their family's gift, not just the hand gestures, but the deeper meaning showing children they're not alone in the silence, building bridges across impossible distances. Her grandmother had carried that gift through darkness, through danger, through generations of hiding and waiting. Now Mary would carry it into light. When's the ceremony, she asked. 3 days, a full formal affair. All the council, noble families, probably half the vampire population on the East Coast. David grimaced. Very dramatic. Lots of speeches. Sounds terrible, completely, but necessary. He touched her shoulder briefly. You don't have to do this if you're not ready. We can wait. Take more time. No. Mary looked down at Michael, who was drowsing peacefully in her arms. We've waited 300 years already. Time to make it official. 3 days later, Mary stood in the restored throne room wearing formal robes in deep blue, the traditional color of caretakers. Jennifer had explained. The Miller pendant hung at her throat, catching light. The room was packed with vampires, all watching as Elizabeth spoke the ancient words in a language Mary didn't know, but somehow understood anyway. The memory echoes, guiding her even now. When Elizabeth finished, David stepped forward with Michael in his arms. The baby was dressed in miniature formal wear, looking impossibly tiny and solemn. Michael Anderson, Crown Prince of the Eastern Courts. David's voice carried through the chamber. I present to you Mary Miller, guardian of the silent heir, protector, teacher, heart of the future king. He placed Michael in Mary's arms. The baby looked up at her with those impossible violet eyes. Then his small hands moved through signs, clumsy still but clear. Love you, home. Mary's eyes burned with tears. She signed back, her hands steady despite everything. Love you, always home. The throne room erupted in applause, vampires acknowledging, accepting, welcoming. And in that moment, Mary understood what her grandmother had known all along. Family wasn't blood or species or even shared history. Family was choice, was showing up, was signing I see you across all the silences between. Outside in the restored gardens, cherry blossoms were blooming out of season. Inside, a makeshift family stood together. Vampire king, human guardian, and the silent heir who would someday change everything. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but it was the beginning they all needed. And for the first time in 300 years, the royal nursery wing was filled with light and laughter and the sound of a child who finally felt at peace. Home, Michael signed again, his small face content. Yes, Mary whispered, holding him close. Home. And she meant it.